Hi,
Thank you.
Mike.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Deb. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Howard.
Um,
Nice to see you.
what brings me here today, and what I'm very curious about is I've been talking to Mike a little bit about this. Is you're bringing in healing around intergenerational trauma. I've had some experience doing that work with some shamanic work around that off and on throughout the years, and I'm very excited to hear that RIM is bringing it in too. So you could just kind of speak to the highlights of that program. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Howard, and I'm really glad you're here. Yeah, I would say that, we've been doing intergenerational RIM work for years, that it's
Hmm.
always been a part of our advanced training program. I just have never advertised it before. So we have actually quite a lot of experience with it. And the way that all of RIM has advanced itself is that sessions came about where I was presented with a client who, in interacting with, let's say, a parent or someone that was a problem for them, that person wasn't really evolved enough to be able to do the work and become compassionate. And so that was what was presented, and this was many years ago. And so that's when I realized, well, I have to really bring in this intergenerational component, because this is going back beyond this generation. And so we've had many years to perfect it, to it's one of the things about RIM is I have spent years perfecting our tools of how to do what it is we're intending to do in the most effective and efficient way. And so I think that's one of the strength of our intergenerational healing aspects. It includes all of RIM, because RIM is always accessing all that's present in the unconscious, that hasn't been known, but that is relative to something that's going on right now. So I don't know, Howard, if that, I don't know if you want some more specifics about that program. Is that what you're looking for also?
That was helpful. Not so much logistics. I'm sure I can get that. So I guess just to see if I'm tracking with you here. Like what I'm looking for is work where I'm actually going to be like in some type of an experience with, and maybe even be surprised, like get access to things that I don't know about my past, and things that I just have this sense. I've had messages that things have happened, and
Mhm.
I'm looking to make them a little bit more real in my present experience, so I can be conscious about them.
Absolutely, and that speaks to where you are in your own personal evolution. So congratulations on that. And yes, I would say pretty much a lot of RIM, a lot of aspects of RIM do that to begin with. And in the intergenerational tool specifically, we really go back multiple generations.
Hmm. Cool. Thank you. Appreciate
And the thing that I think what you said, Howard, is so critical is so much shows up during the REM process that we don't consciously know. That's not in our
it.
conscious awareness. So that's, I would say, with every good REM session that happens.
Thank you.
I think that in RIM, my intention was to go beyond the limitations of the thinking mind, because I had been on a very strong spiritual journey and saw there was so much more beyond our awareness than just what our conscious thoughts were. So that it really was a learning how to collaborate with the EOS is been the journey that I've been on. I would say I continue to be on it, because REM continues to unfold and to find greater and greater magic. Because it's not coming from our thinking. It's not coming from, I should have to speak for myself. It's not coming from my thinking because that's limited. And As I remember the story that always stuck with me, what did the student ask the Zen master? Well, how do you find your answers? And he said, I close my eyes. So that's still true for me.
Mhm.
I still close my eyes, and that's the first place I go to really access what wants to be known, what wants to be shared, what is going to be the most useful for all those involved. Because I'm limited in my intellectual ability to know that.
That's right.
So thanks, Mike.
Yeah, that's right. So, oh, and you mentioned EOS. I don't think we've used that term yet on this call. We were referring to the emotional operating system that we all come with as part of our ability to tap into that and trust our bodies, and our unconscious knows what it's doing. So, and Coco, you said you had a question that you received from someone you were talking to just the other
did.
day.
I
You want to
did.
share? I forget exactly what that was about.
I This is a clinical individual who owns an epigenetics medical practice and was curious about RIM and how that would affect the physical aspect of healing that is done in this practice. So I came in and did a session, a 2-hour session. We did it intergenerational. It was really powerful. And at the end, when she's coming out of it and we're eye to eye contact and conversation, she was inquiring she'd really like to learn RIM. And, but after having just witnessed a facilitator for the last 2 hours, she's like, I don't know that I could do this. Why do you think I could become a RIM facilitator? So what's your answer to that, Dr. Deb?
Right. Well, it's just such a lovely question. It speaks to her humility. And that's always a good thing in learning RIM because it does humble us because it's something different than thinking. And it is illogical and nonlinear. So that I remember it reminds me of having a therapist who had received a group RIM experience when I was speaking on stage at Jack Canfield's conference, and she wanted to have a private session. And so we had a private session, and she told me afterwards that she had scheduled this private session so she could learn how to do this without having to pay for the training. And I said, oh, so what do you think? She says, I have not a clue what you did. I have no idea how to do that. And so that's where this woman was coming from, too. Because we are following both body awareness and spontaneous imagination, which are both directly linked to that part in the body, the nonverbal part of the nervous system, which is emotion, where we have emotion beginning, that it's very non-linear. It's so non-linear that when you're in a session, it is a bit mesmerizing. But what's interesting, how it's different than hypnosis, because people, when I say things like that, they say, oh, well, it's like hypnotherapy. And it's like, it actually works in an exact opposite way as hypnotherapy, because in hypnotherapy, you're really wanting people to get down into that just about asleep place so that that hypnotic suggestions can just slide right in. But the person giving the hypnotic suggestions is the hypnotherapist. In RIM, the self-awareness becomes heightened because we're engaging the true inner self, the voice of the true inner self that shows up in many different forms. We're engaging that so that it starts to really get awake and activated. And we become aware as the mind gives it words and meaning. We become aware of things that have been in there down at the bottom of our unconscious, that residue that's settled in and we've forgotten all about it now. We become aware of that. And it rises to the surface. It's like gets stirred up to rise to the surface. It may have already been stirred up in a triggering situation, but now it is available to be worked with. It is high enough, risen to the surface enough that we can actually work with it and allow it to dissolve in an organic, natural way. So it's not an intellectual process to learn. The tools have some linear process, but they're very simple tools like dialoguing, like sharing your feelings. So the tools, it's really non-clinical, first of all, and it's non-linear. So that means children can do the sessions. I don't mean lead sessions, but they can follow the sessions better than adults because we're really working with the childlike part of ourselves. Again, we're tapping into that. So I would say what it takes to learn RIM is humility, to set aside what you think you know, and that I can figure it out, and I should figure it out. And the better I can figure things out and know ahead of time what I'm going to say or do, the less there is of that, the better you'll be able to learn RIM. So what happens is our own personal journey gets very stirred up because of that. So that we always are working with our own personal growth as a result, because the more personal growth we do, the more we clear all of that need to be a helper and then end up over helping, then that starts to get in the way of the client being able to do their own work, really. We start becoming the problem. And so that's the greatest learning. That is the learning. And so it's that willingness, the willingness to set your ego aside is really the primary requirement to learn RIM.
That's so good. I feel like you've just answered like 10 of the follow-up questions all built in. And I made like 10 different little one-word notes. I was like, oh, that reminds me of, and that reminds me of. That's so juicy. And so it does segue into a couple other questions we have. And I think, who knows what order to go. I've long since you've taught me well to let go of thinking I should know where to go next. So I'm not going to worry about that. But one thing that ties into it is like the surrender, and that reminds me of working with other modalities and like shamanism or plant medicine work or psychedelics, all of that, where surrender is, well, it's not mandatory, but it's not pretty when you don't. So
Right.
or even like meditation, as you know, I've suffered my way through the 10-day silent meditation retreat experience and all of that. And so that reminds me, there's been so much talk and excitement about psychedelic research and what may or may not be possible on that front. And that comes with that's a huge conversation, right? With ups and downs all over the place. But I wonder if you would talk a little bit about maybe the current research and what we're learning, what you're learning about RIM and what's happening in the body and brain.
Right. Oh, it's been so exciting that I've been able to work as a co-investigator with Dr. Paul Cook at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center. And we have been doing RIM sessions, recording them, having EEG recording and a verbal, audio recording of RIM sessions, as well as multiple pre and post information with nursing students who are in a very stressful program. They're usually a little older because they already have a BS degree in another topic, another subject, and they're coming back because they decided they want to be a nurse. And this is a 2-year program. So it's very highly clinical, like you're thrown into the work situation immediately. So it's very, very stressful. So what we have learned, first of all, is the people who volunteer, and all we do is say we're learning this new, trying out a new technique for personal growth. The people who have volunteered actually pretty much always have had trauma, and most of them have been in therapy for years. I was totally shocked. I was surprised. I was a nursing student once upon a time, and I think things have changed a bit. So it's been a perfect group, though, because they are so willing and interested to receive assistance because they're under so much stress and anxiety. And with the pandemic, that really intensified. So what we have found in this research, and we're pretty close to getting, to the end. We're not quite to the end, but we already have significant findings that the qualities of ineffability, that indescribable quality that is present with psychedelic therapy, that is significantly, statistically significant as a outcome of a RIM session. And so Dr. Cook is already referencing, has applied to some conferences to present some preliminary findings of our psychedelic-like effects with regenerating images in memory. So it's extremely exciting, very exciting. I love it because we're only doing one session, and only one session we can get psychedelic like effects. So that's very powerful in this day and age. But it all speaks to we're really going beneath logic the way psychedelics do. Now, the difference, the primary difference between psychedelic therapy and RIM is because the drug is now in charge of opening your unconscious, then there's no longer a choice in psychedelic therapy. It's like, okay, we're going there. And that, whether you like it or not, you're going there. And so in RIM, we have the ability to consistently keep intervening with what is showing up in that psychedelic-like experience so that it can be harvested in a safe, emotionally safe, and more comfortable way, I would say. That there is an opportunity. So what happens is you get greater intellectual awareness, like let's say insight. So you get greater insight, which involves the mind, as well as dissolving of emotional memory, like we're really regenerating emotional or muscle memory with a new outcome, a new ending.
Yeah, I've always appreciated that that difference, so that it is a whole brain experience. It's like I don't, I've done lots of I'll go off and do my hippie camps for the weekend or a week, and I come back and I have to integrate and kind of pull it back together. It's as if my thinking mind wasn't really there, or at least not online. And when I pull it together, then integration is faster and easier for me. Or because we work with people who have relationships with their clients, whether it's a coach or a therapist, that I feel like I don't know if you would agree with this. I feel like that's what makes the other tools, your other therapist or your other coaching tools, more effective. So we're not replacing that. It's getting the big block nobody knows about out of the way. And then that integration the other tools work much faster and easier. Is that
Absolutely.
accurate?
Absolutely. And in fact, back when I was doing more sessions, more private sessions, I would get referrals from therapists who had a client that was stuck, or the client would know they were stuck and want to come do a couple of RIM sessions. I would say it's usually between 1 and 3, and then go back to their therapist, stay involved with their therapist, because that's something very different. It's very relationship oriented, which has a great value to develop a trust relationship. And for some people, that's really essential. And yet, when things get really stuck, when we hit the wall of defensiveness, of our defenses showing up because it's just too scary. It's not that it's not stubbornness. It's that we're just too scared to go through it. And RIM makes that possible without having to be scared, without having to push through, so that you really start to in a very seductive way, kind of slide around and under the defenses in a way that feels safe.
That's right. And this is what I've heard from a number of coaches and therapists who are doing really and intending to really do deep work with their clients is that the resistance fades much faster, right? Which ties into, and I might put these together. I don't know, the other two questions that are coming up next on my list of the people have been asking me about is addiction recovery. And you and I are presenting at NADAC, and Jen is going to join us, and others from the community will be at the NADAC conference in October. So this is very much on our radar anyway, about RIM and its potential for addiction recovery coaches and therapists and counselors, and that leads into their questions often as well. How does this compare to what they're already using, like internal family systems or EMDR or the whole rest of the alphabet soup? So I'll just throw all of that into one bowl and let you stir it up and see what bubbles from that. I don't know what the question is there, but you kind of get a feel of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I would say, I don't know if this will really exactly answer all of that, but what I would say is the feedback that I have gotten from particularly students of IFS is that our tools are so exquisite in accomplishing what we're doing that they haven't seen them anyplace else. And so the efficiency and effectiveness of each session becomes quite, I would say, exquisite is the word that has always come to me, because we're collaborating with the unconscious, we're collaborating with the emotional operating system, we're collaborating with the inherent resourcefulness of the client. So we just don't run into all the obstacles that you run into with an intellectual process. So the more intellectual, the more logical approaches can get results. They're just not going to be as deep and as expansive results.
Excellent, thanks. And Christine has raised her hand. And so Christine, yeah, go ahead. Oh, there you are. Excellent.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your time so much. And I'm really intrigued by RIM. I'm like a newbie. And I really don't know if I completely understand it, and I have a lot more homework to do, but can you just give me like a quick version of why this works?
Oh,
and
okay.
how, like, the science of it a little bit, maybe?
Sure, absolutely. So that so trauma, particularly, the way that emotional memory works is whatever is really an intense feeling, whether it's negative or positive, sticks. It is not it doesn't have to be permanently there, but it sticks until there's some way that we change it. And so with trauma, it's very, very sticky. Negative experiences are remembered more significantly because it's part of our caveman brain to try and keep us safe. So we won't do that again because we want to stay physically safe. So what happens is the area in the brain that safety, both emotional safety and physical safety, happen actually does not discern between the two. So when we feel emotionally unsafe, the body system responds as if we're in physical threat of dying. We're going to be annihilated. That's the fear that gets triggered neurologically. And so it's way overdone because in reality, most of the time, we're not physically threatened with death. But that's the experience, the emotional experience. So those memories get very lodged in the body. And the way that we like to talk about it in RIM to kind of make it more accessible, RIM uses the interoceptive system. The interoceptive system is all of our biology, receptors, our sensors. It's a sensory system. And so we're constantly, moment to moment, having feelings come in, experiences and feelings that are all intertwined, coming in an interoceptive way in the body. And we experience it as both a subjective feeling, but also as a body experience. So we may suddenly get tension in our shoulders, or we might have our stomach tighten, but these are not controllable muscles. These are part of the involuntary nervous system that gets triggered. And so as those all of that is flowing through, feelings are designed, they're organically designed to come in through the interoceptive system, both the physical body, emotional awareness, and to bring us information so we can stay safe, and then to flow on down what we call the emotional river of emotion. So it comes in, a feeling is a transient state of awareness. It's intended to come in, be received by us, and then flow on down the river so it dissipates. What happens is the mind and the ego and that part of us that really doesn't want discomfort, we don't like discomfort, starts to resist and say, no, I don't want to feel that. No, I don't want to think about that. No, I don't want to remember that. No, I won't let this happen. And so what happens now, the river, the interoceptive river of emotion hits the resistance, and the resistance acts just like a dam in a river. So now all of those feelings, thoughts, beliefs that are scaring the heck out of us, they now are eddying and they can't go on, they can't expire. So all of a sudden they go underground and they go down into the body, into the unconscious. And as, oh gosh, I can't think of her name, molecules of emotion.
Candace Pert.
Yeah, Candace Pert said the subconscious lives at the cellular levels. Subconscious memory lives in the body, in the cells. And so what happens with REM is we have tools that allow us to take the dam, create floodgates. So now with floodgates, with these tools, we start to allow whatever is down in that unconscious memory in the body to show up through spontaneous imagination and body awareness, come rise to the surface in conscious awareness, and be able to begin to be expressed through floodgates. So it's in a safe way so that we're not going to be flooded with emotion, because the system does not want to be flooded because that's overwhelming. So in REM, we create floodgates, and then very gradually, whatever is down there is able to rise up, be able to flow on down the river in a way that feels safe and constructive, beneficial. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if you're still on, Christine. Maybe you give me some feedback as to.
No, I'm with you.
Okay.
It was interesting, and Michael and I will probably talk again because he did a session with me. So I'm kind of like using that for my experiential learning. And something happened. I have a hard time describing it. And I was really intrigued by like the thoughts that were coming up and the memories. And then I had lots of thoughts about, it seemed like my husband and his generational family, which
Yes.
was interesting. I'm not really sure what any of that meant exactly. I have an idea, but anyway, so yeah, the whole thing is really intriguing to me.
Yes, well, it's, that's what my journey has been, to continuously be learning through the experiences that I had with clients, and now ongoing in teaching it and having more this research, all of these ways. But in terms of that science, the emotional memory, that's, muscle memory, is accessible through the interoceptive system, as I was saying, so that it'll spontaneously begin to show up. And as Carl Jung said, if we really listen to our unconscious, a whole story unfolds.
Yeah.
It just unfolds. It's not that we're thinking about it. It's not that we're trying to think about it. We don't even, we've forgotten about it. Or maybe, or sometimes we don't even know the story. It's out,
Yeah.
it's not even within our emotional memory. And so in the book, if you read Goodbye, Hurt and Pain, the book, I talk about the discernment between in the unconscious, that I see it as a couple of layers to make it easier to understand. And the layer that's closest to consciousness is the subconscious, which is where all of the information that has been forgotten, repressed, suppressed is. That's where all of that is. But if you go down deeper underneath that, then there is unconscious knowings that can be from the collective unconscious. It can be intuition. It can be spiritual experience. So you go deeper or more expansive. It's kind of at the same time. They're kind of counter to. I mean, they work together. That we have spontaneous insight, flashes of insight arrive. And so I would say, if I were to say, how come that's happened? I would say very much it's because of the kind of person I was, how I lived, and that I was always more spontaneous. I got myself in trouble that way earlier in my life because things would just come out of my mouth and I didn't even know what I was going to say. And so eventually, I wanted to be able to have better I wouldn't say control, but better awareness of how to harness that stream of consciousness that is constantly flowing.
Mhm.
And so that's really RIM is the result of that. We all have it. It's the way we're designed. We have not known how to work with it because the mind wants to override it because it scares the mind. So
Yeah.
if you really look at the thinking and the emotional parts of the nervous system, it's no wonder they don't work together. They're like a couple that is so opposite that they're constantly mad at each other, you know.
Well,
So
I am an executive coach and I have then transitioned. So I use this for my own trauma healing, which I didn't even know I had. So
yeah.
I have my second question. Don't mean to like take over there, but so many people I meet, I feel the need to help them heal their trauma,
Mhm.
right? Like I'm learning more tools, and RIM I think will be maybe my next one. But many of these people are in pain through
Mhm.
trauma, but yet they don't even realize what it is. Do you experience that a lot?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because the mind doesn't want, the mind is all about creating conscious safety, uh, staying the same. So the mind is not creative in the same way the emotional creative part of the brain is. It doesn't fantasize, it doesn't create things that are not within our capacity. So what the mind does when it problem solves, it looks to history to see what worked before, which is great. I mean, that's helpful. And it's limited because it's not innovative. It's not going beyond what we know. So RIM, through the accessing, we're really letting the emotional creative part of the nervous system lead. Like
Mhm.
it starts the process, or like Salk, who invented the polio vaccine, says, intuition shows the intellectual mind where to look. And so we rely on that to show us where to look. And then the body and spontaneous imagination take us deeper into what is there that is, we think about it just for simplicity as a magnetic charge. That's where the trauma and the pain is in the body, in the psyche. And the psyche includes the physical body in our perspective. So that when there's this magnetic charge, it's like it calls the unconscious attention to it. So we don't know it ahead of time. And it can be very much a surprise. And sometimes, like for instance, when I worked with a woman who was in the Boston Marathon bombing, she was an observer at the end, the finish line, and had an implosion injury that she was really struggling to recover from. She had had 125 cognitive behavioral therapy sessions, and yet her body was still reactive. It would still have flashbacks to that moment of the implosion. And so we did 2 sessions. And in those sessions, in the very first one, she went back to a childhood memory of trauma that she had. I can't remember now, so long ago, but whether she had even remembered it at all. But it had certainly been forgotten for a long time if she had, and worked with that memory. So we really regenerated that memory. And then the next one, it was like a generational memory that showed up that was out of this life. It was not in this lifetime, it was through the generations back into a previous, we could call it a generational memory, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all of a sudden her physical healing journey changed. It started to work. Her body started to be able to receive the healing physical work she was doing. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. Would you say the statement is true that everyone has childhood trauma?
Yeah, I think the degree of childhood, this is what's always fascinating. It's that trauma is very interpreted in terms of how sensitive we are.
Uh-huh.
You can remember in school where very simple things happen. Like, for instance, I can go back to my own childhood to Mean Girl stuff. And I can remember being in the girls' bathroom crying. And I can still remember that because it was very hurtful at a very deep sensitive level because I was very vulnerable to it. So now there's that kind of trauma. And then there is the trauma where somebody actually has been sexually abused.
Correct.
So it's not the same. And yet it doesn't matter. We don't want to evaluate our trauma.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to make some trauma, better than others, I guess is, rated as a bigger trauma, but they are different. And that when you have the more serious trauma, you can have greater mental health fallout with that. So that we're always looking at all the factors. There's so many things in the holistic picture. And I don't know, does that help, Christine?
Yeah.
If I talk myself into a corner here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. They're great.
Gosh, thanks, Christine. I want to tag onto that a little bit because we're talking so much about trauma. And I remember when I started with RIM, how much this conversation would have scared me because
Right.
that wasn't my world. Right. And so, in what you were just talking about answers a whole thread of other questions, because we're talking about how does this compare to other modalities? How does this fit into a coaching role or working with a lot of different populations? If you're not a licensed mental health professional, how is that different than a coaching model? So teaching the safety is part of learning RIM to stay in our own lane and all of that. And that I think the big difference is that in healing the client's trauma, we don't decide, right? Because we're not in the business of diagnosing or prescribing. So
Right.
it could be, as an executive coach, that the client is stuck in indecision. or
Right.
suddenly feels like they don't have a fit in their workplace, or their leadership role is just changed somehow in their interaction with clients or whatever, and they go to, and they might think it ties to their childhood trauma story, capital T trauma, small t trauma, it doesn't really matter, because when we follow what spontaneously shows up, often people that have done a lot of trauma work and a lot of healing work will go to those smaller t trauma. They'll go to the mean girl, the things, and they'll go to the playground bullying scenes, and they'll go to things that they never would have thought of or never would have thought should matter. So without judgment at all, those come up and redo them, and those are the scenes where they might feel like they've never used their voice, and in certain situations. So we don't ever want to be in charge of directing that, which is, I think, the biggest difference from other modalities.
Yeah, I think it really is. And I would say, so we have a lot of executive coaches and corporate
Mhm.
consultants who use RIM in their practices or their work. And I would say, I remember Yarrow, who is works with CEOs in Europe. And many of the CEOs he worked with had issues with their fathers. And so what he found is, because what CEOs like, what they're all about is quick results. And if you get quick results, they'll do whatever it is you ask them to do. And that is what RIM gets, is very quick results. And so that's why they like it. CEOs and executive coaches are very successful with it, is because of that. And I think that I agree that it's like there's just no evaluation of what kind of. That's why, for instance, in the book, I talk about hurt and pain rather than trauma. And I have, in the past, I've stayed away from using the term trauma with RIM, just because it felt like it was at that point reserved for therapists. But now, that has really changed in our culture, because we have so much hurt and pain going on. Particularly, it seemed like the pandemic was a landmark experience that really opened us up, cracked us open as a culture, as a world. And as a result, instead of mental health. So this is my whole thing, though. They say call everything emotional as mental health, and because I am a professional mental health person, I know that's not accurate. It's not all mental health, because mental health works with mental illness. We're not talking mental illness. We're talking emotional health. And emotional health affects everybody, every human being on the planet, because it's like physical health and emotional health are the two aspects of us that have to thrive in order for us to survive and live well, live happily. And so RIM is not for mental illness. It is not. And so there are some particular diagnoses that it is contraindicated for. We teach you all about that, because we want, above everything else, we want RIM to be safe. And I used to teach psychiatric nursing, and I'm very, very conscious of maintaining safety. That is number one. Professionalism and safety are integrity. Those are three of the must-haves in RIM. As I began it, and as we continue it, and as we grow, those are the values that are intentional and also implicit, I would say, eventually in RIM, because it is such a privilege to work with people at this level. And the RIM facilitators will tell you, it's so intimate. We join with clients in their unconscious. That is the most sacred place for them. And so we have to tread very lightly, respectfully, and it is sacred ground. And so that's one of the ways it's very, very different than therapy or other techniques, I would say, is that we really respect and understand our place in this work that is indescribable. We go to this indescribable place with people that can expose the vulnerability. And so, which is why we end up doing our own personal work too, because we have to be willing to be with their vulnerability, to be with their pain. And the reality is in RIM, what you learn after session after session after session is that the EOS is absolutely resilient, that we're way more resourced than we think, that we can work with terrible trauma and survive and thrive. I mean, that our own. And it's only in the seeing and being there that the psyche and the intellect really believe it. So that's why we have a lot of experiences, we have a lot of practice sessions, so that your body memory trusts the EOS system, that it is resilient, that the outcomes that we're getting are possible, that they're rooted in the neuroscience. Because otherwise, when you talk about it, people go, oh, that's all inflation, it's all marketing. But it's like, no, it's really not, because we're not doing it. We're not doing it. We're collaborating with our emotional operating system. We are designed to have this capacity, but we just haven't known how to collaborate with it. We haven't known how to work with it. And once we work with it, oh my gosh, it's so much easier. So as a therapist, because I was a therapist for over 20 years before I was burned out enough and had some experiences that shifted me to the place where I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. It's just a little too hard and tiring. And that was when RIM came along. That was when the experiences that spontaneously happened that led into the development of RIM showed up. And it's so much easier because we're not having to do the work. And actually, it's so much easier for the client because it's not like they're having to do work either. Because work is more of when we think of, I'm going to have to think something, I'm going to have to problem solve, I'm going to have to analyze. And RIM is none of that. It's really none of that. Now, we do have conscious awareness that has words and meaning. So we have to have whole brain function.
Excellent. Well, we are back at the top of the hour again, dagnabbit. And it went very quickly. It's so much beautiful sharing and wisdom there. Anything else you want to add, or that anyone else, did we raise more questions than answers? Do we have any new questions that want to be asked? Feel free to put them in the chat and we'll deal with it. We don't have to rush off. And I also want to be respectful and recognize that I think folks have blocked out an hour for this. So we'll see if there's anything else that wants to be shared, or if you want to follow up with me, you know where to find us. And we would love to have more follow-up conversations. We'll just leave that out there. Anything else you want to add in farewell, Dr. Deb, or anyone else?
Just that I think, probably you can pick up the level of passion we have, that I have, that RIM Institute has for this organic, natural way of healing, because it's the next paradigm that is beyond where we have been in the past. And we don't the whole idea, I learned from a physicist actually that RIM is a quantum technique, and the reason it's a quantum technique is because it collaborates with nature. So things that collaborate with nature, and when you look at quantum physics, what looks like on the surface when you go deeper looks really different in quantum physics. That's exactly the way RIM is. So we can start with what we think is the problem. We can start with what we think we're feeling, what we think is going on. And when we dip beneath it, there is just so much more. It doesn't mean that wasn't true in some way, but there's so much more rich context and experience and emotional memory that's beneath the surface that changes the whole picture, so that the analysis would have been empty. It would have just taken up space. And I learned that, once I started playing with RIM and doing RIM sessions, every once in a while, because I had been a psychotherapist for over 20 years, that part of me would get hooked. And I would get hooked into this psychotherapy conversation. And then pretty soon when we dipped into RIM, I would realize, oh, that was such a waste of time. Because we now got the answer that we were just talking all around.
Yeah.
So, and wondering about. So I guess I would invite anyone, if you feel ready for passion and letting go, setting aside ego enough to allow life itself, the beauty and the design of health of life itself to really begin to express through you in a healing way for yourself and others, then, come join us. Come join us. This is a mission. We're on a mission here. In fact, our mission statement is to eliminate unnecessary suffering. So some suffering is necessary to learn and, grieve and all of that, to have our feelings. But there is a place where we're going way beyond that and suffering so much longer than we need to. So that's what this is about. So I just am so happy to have everybody here and interested. I'm 73 years old, so it's like, I am on a mission to engage the right people to continue for RIM to have its life. It's kind of like my youngest child. And it's still dependent on me right now. So it needs to become self-sufficient. So thank you for being here, all of you. I appreciate it so much. And thank you, Mike and Jen.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Deb. Fantastic.